Um, Thank you all for the service, for the beautiful music, for being here with us in beloved community. I neglected to introduce myself. Most of you know me, many of you, probably all of you. I am Joshua Berg. I'm the guest minister this morning. Delighted to be here, even if it is virtually. Um, as I mentioned, tomorrow is Memorial Day, and it's a day of remembrance to honor U.S. military personnel who lost their lives fighting for freedom and service to this country. So I'd like today to actually consider, as James Baldwin did in that reading, what freedom is, to consider freedom. So I'm going to ask you some questions, no need for a show of hands, but how many people believe that we live in a free world? Now think about, if you believe, how many people believe that we live in a free country? And of those who answered in the affirmative to either, are you then able to define unequivocally what freedom is? In other words, what you mean by being free, what it means to be truly free. And most of my life, I too believed we live in a free country. I too also never really attempted to think in depth about how and what that is, let alone define what freedom actually means, until really relatively recently. And especially from my vantage of privilege, it just feels great to just accept as an adage that we are the land of the free, home of the brave. Feels good to say that. But in thinking more deeply about what freedom actually means, I realize we can strive to be a land of the free only if we are indeed the home of the brave of heart and spirit. And unfortunately, many of us fall quite short of that. Although I am aware there are many freedoms that many of us enjoy, I no longer accept that we live in a free country, because unfortunately, many others do not enjoy equal freedoms. I no longer believe there is even such a thing as pure freedom. As my awareness of what freedom actually is comes into greater focus, I understand more and more how much the price of that awareness, as it said, the price of knowledge, and especially the price of liberty, is indeed vigilance, as it said often, constant vigilance to grow and sustain freedoms, constant vigilance, which requires risk, courage, and vulnerability. And I know that working for freedom, I also know it's not a process that has a culmination. We won't at one point be free. Freedoms are forever gained and lost. This is not pessimism. This is all not pessimism, this thought. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Claiming freedom is imperfectible, enables us to set achievable goals, rather than this insatiable ideal of freedom that ends up discouraging because of its very unattainability. So I'm confident the potential exists for achieving more freedoms, and especially equitable freedoms. I am confident, I am hopeful, I have hope for America, not because we are the land of the free, but because I regularly witness people I respect and love, including those here today, especially within our Unitarian Universalist faith communities. I continually witness them striving against great odds to be freer. And that gives me hope. Freedom is commonly envisioned in the United States as this aspirational light at the end of some endless tunnel. However, if instead we traverse tunnels along the journey, which are measurable and through which we can actually plot a course, we will reach light again and again and again. Now, one way to plot those courses is by understanding what freedom is not. This is a tough thing. So lack of freedom involves being held hostage. enslaved, physically or mentally, emotionally or spiritually. Lack of freedom involves being hindered or restricted in some way. Now, in theory, let's say I have the freedom to purchase a fancy sports car. But am I really free to do that if I can't afford it? Am I free to do that if the purchase sends me into unreasonably burdensome debt? You may say that I am. That's a material good. Am I free if in doing that, my wife will literally end me? I don't think there's as much freedom in there. But that's a material good. Let's suppose it's not a fancy sports car, but a life-saving medical procedure. Even if my relative freedom affords me access to a qualified surgeon, am I free to undergo, and that's a big if, am I free to undergo the procedure if it means consigning myself to what is effectively debt servitude? Freedom doesn't necessarily mean everyone has equal access to material goods, as I said about the car, but in this country, healthcare at least is supposedly a human right granted to all equitably. So if there is not equitable access to what is a human right, if some are hindered or restricted, if some are held hostage by a capitalism that privileges the few over the many, are we truly a free country? The country that people are fighting and dying for. We must consider that. Even as my own mother is blessed with the best rehabilitation care in the country after a massive stroke, I am struck with the fact that countless others are by no means free to access the same care. It is assumed that all are free, for instance, to walk a public thoroughfare. But is a Black person wearing a hoodie free to walk a street in a predominantly upper-class white neighborhood when that freedom comes with significantly increased risk to their safety and their very life? We are witness, as we have been in the past week, repeatedly to the fact that even our children are not free to go to school without fearing for their life. If prejudice, fear-mongering, and othering threatens or limits our freedom, if the powerful and power-drunk can hold the country hostage to protect their wealth and dominion, are we truly a free country? Now, many with advantage and power prevent others from accessing the same. So given the stratification into privilege and exclusion, what appears to be equality in our country in the form of equal distribution, which is often considered equal. It's often considered fair and equal access. Equal distribution is an illusion because of this stratification. Ironically, what those in power often also don't understand is that, as American civil rights activist Fannie Lou Hamer noted, nobody's free until everybody's free. And since the wealthy and powerful can only retain what they consider freedom by subjugation, by manipulation, by ignoring the safety and freedoms of others, they too are not truly free, but dependent on that. And since their assumed freedoms are therefore tenuous at best, the country falls victim to a destructive desperation when they try to hold on to them. We witness this desperation when control is threatened. The powered elite use coercively, subversively, illegitimately acquired legal rights as a means of control. When it becomes clear that the legal right to own a firearm, for instance, infringes on the human right to life, as has happened in the US, we witness this desperation. When it appears that the ability to control others' bodily autonomy under the guise of religious freedom is threatened, we witness this desperate reactionism. The US is currently controlled by those so desperate to hold on to power and wealth that they are willing to deceive and manipulate using means ranging from provoking fear and anger to direct violence. Many in our government, whose duty it is to protect life first liberty second, and property third. Are those desperate few, or collude with the same? If you agree with that, I'll ask again, who here believes we are truly a free country? Given that, how do we achieve equitable freedom in order to honor all those who have died for that very cause? How can we promote the equity, justice, and compassion that our UU principles demand of us? It's not an easy answer, but one thing we can do is employ something first that diffuses the hate and anger, those strong emotions that are so coercive, that renders the self-serving domination impotent. Get ready, because here goes the minister with that old standby again. Love. And yes, we do also need solutions that are much more specific and targeted, which we get together and accomplish, but without a baseline of that potent, unflinching love, that love-dependent web that I talked about in my last sermon. Without that, none of those specific solutions will be effective. Don't just believe me. The theologian Paul Tillich writes that justice is violated when another's power of being is rejected, when we don't love another. Therefore, justice preserves only what love reunites. Reunite first with love and then justice. Justice is, Tillich writes, the form in which and through which love performs its work, the channel through which the compulsive and forceful power of love is necessarily directed. The author Bell Hooks, the brilliant author, in her essay, Love as the Practice of Freedom, states that we desperately need an ethic of love to intervene in our self-centered longing for change. Fundamentally, if we are only committed to an improvement in that politic of domination that we feel leads directly to only our individual exploitation or oppression, we not only remain attached to the status quo, but act in complicity with it, nurturing and maintaining those very systems of domination. In other words, we have to be less selfish and thereby more loving. This is exactly why our eighth principle is so important. Paula Cole-Jones explains that none of the other principles mentions love. By having beloved community in the eighth principle, it brings our commitment to love higher in our consciousness. It then, the eighth principle, goes on to inform the other principles. That's why it's there, to inform them with specifics relevant to our hierarchical society, which functions only through dominance. The dismantling of racism and other oppressions in ourselves and other institutions. The specific course we must plot to reach equitable freedom, to truly manifest those lights at the end of the tunnels that are freedoms for all. The eighth principle, in its specificity, reminds that equitable freedom, that true fairness, unlike the equality, even distribution I mentioned, true fairness requires a specific restorative justice to reverse historic injustices that continue to restrict all of our freedoms. And the resistance to this type of corrective in the country, to this corrective action, that resistance is natural. It's natural, especially to those like me who are comfortable in the status quo, because loving in this way is not easy. It is one of our weapons in this war. As Bell Hooks also pointed to, in this country, there is a misguided ethic of individualism that ignores our undeniable, unretractable interdependence. And recognizing the uncontested humanity in each other requires giving up individual comfort and privileges, as well as confronting violent oppression head on. That's not easy. Love broadens our concern to what is hurting the collective us, what is damaging to the interdependent web of existence. And it is not only not easy, but it is painful. We can't minimize the struggle either. The fact is, starting from the place our society finds itself today will mean that the process of liberation can only be a painful and long process. Langston Hughes cautions in his poem, Freedom, that freedom, it will not come today, this year, nor ever through compromise and fear. So we must not be afraid. We must be the land of the brave. And this painful process of complete radical reorientation is necessary to become the home of the free. We must let freedom sting so that it can ring. I know that to many, including myself, this reorientation feels nigh impossible given the state of affairs in this country and all of the, you can list the things, the potential we almost certainly face for that situation to get even worse. Again, go to Bell Hooks. She comforts that once we choose love, however, we instinctively possess the inner resources to confront that pain. She reassures that moving through the pain to the other side, we find the joy. And it will be a long and painful process, but we will find the joy as we move through it. We find the freedom of spirit that a love ethic brings. Now, even that may provide little comfort in these moments when we sit at home alone and watch the news, despondent. However, in a beloved community like this, of like-hearted souls supporting each other through the struggle, change can come. I have that belief. I know this because throughout history, radical change has been catalyzed, promoted, and sustained by just such communities. So I admonish anyone who memorializes the fallen soldiers of freedom, military and civilian, tomorrow or at any time, without considering, acknowledging, and fighting for the freedom they fight for the freedom themselves, they fight themselves in any way they can. Let us be the home of the free by committing to being the land of the brave.